chair of the House Select Committee on China, who is sponsoring a bill to ban TikTok in the United States and is looking broadly at the threat that China presents to our country. Congressman, great to have you with us today. Thank you very much for being here. Quick soundbite. The president was asked about banning TikTok, and here's what he had to say. Watch.
Ban TikTok.
Ban
TikTok, yeah.
Well, the answer, I'm not sure. I know I don't have it on my...
Your thoughts on this whole banning of TikTok?
Well, the fundamental problem is this, Martha. It's the ownership structure. TikTok is owned by ByteDance, and ByteDance is effectively controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. The CCP shut down ByteDance for a period of time for failing to follow core socialist values, and then ByteDance had to apologize, and really a groveling apology, and then they hired 4,000 more censors to do the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party. They've promised that all future product lines will follow core socialist values. So that is what's concerning, and it's also not just about dance videos that, you know, Democratic politicians might use to get votes. It's increasingly an app through which young Americans get their news. So we have to ask ourselves the question, do we want to give the Chinese Communist Party the ability to selectively edit or censor the news that Americans see? So that is the concern. That's why in a bipartisan fashion, we have voted to ban it for government devices. And I think if you've already bought into that logic, it makes sense to explore a broader ban or a forced sale. So that's what's happening here. I'm glad to see certain states stepping up, and I'm hoping to bring more of my colleagues along in this discussion as we work on the Select Committee on China.
How likely do you think a nationwide ban, or when states start to ban it for everyone in their state, not just on government devices, what does that future look like to you?
Well, I think it's a sensible policy. And again, the ban would allow for a forced sale to an American company. Now, the counterargument right now is there's an ongoing review through the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, and this idea of whether you can put a mitigation strategy in place to secure data for Americans. I'm very skeptical of that approach. But for people making the argument that this is absolutely essential for sharing information, or, oh, my 13-year-old is going to be mad at me, well, let's look at the other part of the problem here. It's highly addictive. We've seen skyrocketing rates of anxiety, depression, suicide among young Americans. Do we honestly believe that we can't survive without TikTok or just a constant addiction to the apps in our phone? I actually think that's healthier for our society going forward.
And in China, kids aren't allowed to use it for the amounts of time, right? They're blocked on how long they can use it per day in China.
It's a sanitized version of the app in China. Yeah, it's a set period of time.
They don't want their kids to be addicted to it.
And they promote mostly educational videos, science videos. So there is proof in the pudding that they understand at least the risk of their kids having access to the app.
Incredible time suck for so many people and families. This is what the White House said about tonight's speech, switching gears for a little bit here, but staying with China, on what the president will say about the China incident. Watch.
Well, of course, our relationship with China was always going to be in the speech. The president has obviously worked to continue to manage our relationship with China to a place of competition and not conflict. I would anticipate that he will mention the events of the last week, but again, the speech and the larger pieces about his foreign policy have not been reworked because of this balloon.
Okay, so here's a map that shows the 10 different balloon incursions that we're now aware of over the past about 6 years. I mean, this is extraordinary. This isn't one balloon that passed over the country. So how much attention does the president need to sort of head on, this is what we're facing from China tonight?
I think this should be a Sputnik moment, not because the capabilities of this balloon per se were equivalent to Sputnik in, you know, the late 50s, but because this illustrates that the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party is not just an over there problem. It's a right here at home problem. It's a threat to our sovereignty. And so President Biden should seize upon this moment to be honest with the American people about failures in our system leading to this incursion into our airspace that was not dealt with quick enough, and then galvanize the American people around a bipartisan response to defend ourselves, to defend our sovereignty, to do what's necessary to ensure that the Chinese don't think they can get away with something like this. And I can't help but think this was deliberately timed to coincide with Secretary Blinken's planned trip, which he postponed, to Beijing. I mean, they've been willing to embarrass our diplomats in the past to send a message of, here's what we can get away with. Here's what we can do to you, and you won't push back. Your career politicians, your companies who want profits in China will always come crawling back. So I hope the president takes advantage of this moment and doesn't try and slam dunk the response or gloss over the incident or downplay. This should be a moment we can all come together in defense of our country.
It's a good opportunity when you're speaking to the country to be clear-eyed about the threat that we face. And I think that people have woken up to what we face. And I think that if he goes by it too gently, it's going to be a standout of tonight. Reports that there was one of these spy balloons crashed near Hawaii, and that was how we started to open our eyes to just how many of them had been out there on prior data that had been gathered at the Pentagon.
Well, I think there's two problems here. One is if this happened and civilian officials in the previous administration weren't aware of it, or two, it happened and we were only able to piece it together after the fact. The latter would suggest we have a problem in our early warning, our radar system, and that we need a real sophisticated strategy for countering this.
So they were going over our ICBM fields, and now we know that they have more ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, with nuclear warheads than we do. That a problem? It's
a huge problem. There's a video that's since been deleted from Chinese social media from 2018 where they were using a balloon identical to this to test hypersonic missiles. So this could be weaponized in the future, and that's troubling.
General Keane also mentioned that. I think the hypersonic capability is a huge part of this. Great to have you with us, Congressman. Congressman, thank you very much for being here. Congressman Mike Gallagher.